Then Jessica Jones smiled warmly and she said I'm just kidding, and then I breathed a sigh of relief, and then Jessica Jones walked up to me and kissed me passionately, and then I made love to Jessica Jones again, and then after I was done having sex with my wife Jessica Jones I got a telepathic message from Professor Charles Xavier, and he said, James Gray, I need your help, please come to my mansion. And then I woke up Jessica Jones and I said, I have to go see Professor Charles Xavier, do you remember him, Jessica? And then she said, yes, I definitely remember him. And then I said, well, now he needs my help with something. And then Jessica asked me, do you know what he needs your help with? And then I said, yes ma'am, he needs my help with the Sentinel program, and he wants me to stop Oliver Trask and William Stryker, and Professor Charles Xavier believes I can do this all by myself, and he's right, I definitely can, but those people are not the only problems, they are just a side effect of a much larger problem that will have to be dealt with very soon, and I want you to come with me and help me out with everything, Jessica. And then she said, yes, definitely, I'm coming with you. And then Jessica Jones and I got dressed and I put on my superhero costume that I made out of divine first metal, and my suit actually looks like the armor that Superman wears in the Man of Steel, except with two minor differences. I have an infinity symbol on my chest and my color scheme is black and purple like Jessica's costume is black and purple. And then Jessica Jones grabbed my hand and I teleported us to Professor Charles Xavier's school for gifted youngsters, and then I walked inside the mansion and Jean Grey said to Professor Charles Xavier, James is here, Professor, and me and Jean Grey are actually twins. Jean Grey is actually my twin sister, but I'm more powerful than she is. And then Jean Grey said, he's much stronger than I remember. And then Professor Xavier asked Jean Grey, what do you mean? And she said, I can feel his strength, it's a side effect of having the Phoenix Force, you see, I can sense great power in the universe. And you might be right, Professor Xavier, he could probably do this all by himself. And then Charles Xavier said, in my mind, come to my office, James. And then I said, in Charles' mind, I'm coming, Professor, and that surprised Charles Xavier because I was able to bypass everything in his mind. And then Charles looked at Jean Grey and he said, Jean, I think you might be right, maybe he can get Logan and Scott Summers back for us after all and stop this war before it even starts. And then I walked in Charles Xavier's office and then Jean Grey said, James, excitedly, and I noticed Jean Grey had been crying, and then she ran up to hug me, and then before I knew it Jean Grey was now hugging me, and I hugged her back and I held the back of her head gently and I said, don't worry little sister, everything will be fine, I promise. And then I asked Charles Xavier what happened, Professor, and then Charles Xavier began to explain, two men named William Stryker and Oliver Trask captured two teachers of mine, Logan and Scott Summers, and I need your help to get them back and stop whatever Oliver Trask and William Stryker are planning. And then Charles Xavier asked me, can you do this? And then I looked at Charles Xavier with a serious face and I said with conviction, I will try my best, Professor, but I might have to kill William Stryker and Oliver Trask. And then Professor Charles Xavier said, I understand, but I'd hoped you would do this without bloodshed if possible. And then I said, Oliver Trask and William Stryker hate mutants and they will never stop until you are all dead. I can read their minds and they will never change, Professor. And then Charles Xavier asked me, how can you read their minds, and they are hundreds of miles away from us? And then I said, my powers have no limits, Professor Charles Xavier, and I can promise you this, that I will get Logan back and I will stop Oliver Trask and William Stryker and I will save the mutants, but I'm doing it my way. And then Professor Charles Xavier said, please consider not killing them because I don't want the world to think that we are monsters. And then I said, well, that's where you are wrong, Professor Xavier, the human race already thinks we are monsters and Oliver Trask and William Stryker are not the only problems. They are a side effect of a much larger problem. And then Charles Xavier said, you're powerful and you don't have to kill them. And then I said, you're right, I definitely don't have to kill them. And then I said, I will see you soon, Professor Xavier. And then I teleported in front of Magneto and that instantly alerted Sabretooth, and he looks just like the actor from the TV series Ray Donovan in X-Men Origins Wolverine. And then Sabretooth attacked me unprovoked and then I backhanded him, sending him flying into his fridge. And then Sabretooth got back up angry and he said, that was my refrigerator. And I had all my steaks in that fridge, you fucker.